So I want to welcome everyone to tonight's program, PFAS No Moss. This program is being sponsored by the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom US, better known as WILPF, and its Earth Democracy Committee. WILPF has been a long-time supporter of our work, and the Vermont Military Poisons and PFAS Coalition is a project of the Burlington, Vermont WILPF branch. My name is Margeurite Adelman, and I'll be one of the facilitators for this program.
And I am Morgan Galloway, and I am the other facilitator. We want to acknowledge and welcome all of those who are attending and representing a wide range of groups across the country. Please enter your names, organizations, if applicable, your location, and emails in the chat if you're comfortable doing so. Thank you to each of you who care about PFAS issues and forever chemicals, who care about the issue of pesticides with PFAS, protecting farming and farm workers, and dealing with the issue of toxins in our food supply, as well as the health of all living creatures and the health of our air, soil, and water.
We have come together tonight to learn from our panel of scientists who are sharing their knowledge and helping us to understand what we need to do to protect ourselves, our communities, and our planet. They'll be illustrating the ways that PFAS is connected to us and to our daily lives. Nowadays, even many pesticides contain PFAS, and these two toxins, PFAS and pesticides, as well as others, are contaminating our air, water, soil, food, and so many of the products that we use or come into contact with every day. They are bioaccumulating in our bodies and in all living things. I have to say that we're really grateful to these experts for volunteering their time to educate us tonight.
So I have a few Zoom housekeeping details to share. First of all, if you could put your microphone on mute and also your camera before we show the film. You can choose speaker under view. So if you haven't done that already, I think it may have been preset that way, but feel free to go to the view and change it to speaker view. And then when it comes to any questions that you have for the speakers, please put them in the chat. Feel free to add a question at any time. We'll keep track of it. We'll be taking one or two clarifying questions after each speaker has concluded their remarks. And however, we will be holding other questions until the very end of all the presentations.
So why this presentation? Well, the truth is that we have so much that we need to learn about PFAS chemicals, pesticides, and other toxins, as well as biosolids and sludge, and how all of these things are affecting us and are all interconnected. Vermont, like many states, has a number of migrant workers, and we want to highlight the environmental justice issues that affect them.
Migrant workers and farmers come into direct and dangerous contact with the chemicals discussed in our film PFAS No Moss by filmmaker Edwin Nieves, who's here with us tonight. Every one of us ends up with these chemicals in our food, water, air, and personal products. We're all affected, but farm workers are affected in multiple different ways.
So without further ado, let's show our short documentary film, and after it, you'll have an opportunity to meet our filmmaker, Edwin Nieves, and ask him a few questions.
Next segment. Thank you. Hi, Edwin. We really enjoyed working together on this project, and I wanted to share a little bit and then ask you a question and see if the audience had questions as well. So it was my goal to make an accessible educational film about PFAS, having learned so much from folks in the PFAS and Military Poisons Coalition and the Pesticides and Poison Action Network. It took me about 7 years to feel like I had caught up with understanding this issue. So I really wanted to make a film that would be accessible right off the bat for anyone who wanted to see it. And I really wanted that film to center the voice of Christian Santos, the farm worker who was interviewed in the film. I think, there was obviously some things that came up in the film that aren't necessarily directly related to PFAS, but are related to the issue of toxins and poisons. And one of the things that I learned making the film is that farm workers will often be using formaldehyde as a cow foot bath, which is also something that causes cancer. So the other goal of the film is for farm workers themselves to be able to report any workplace abuse that they experience and to feel empowered to do that, which is also part of the goal of the Milk with Dignity campaign. So, and lastly, one of the things that was important to me was that this film be linguistically accessible by making it in Spanish and English. That's one of the things I'm the most pleased about as far as the film that we created a film that would be equally accessible to Spanish and English speakers and did not privilege one group over another. So with all that being said, I wondered, Edwin, what making the film meant to you and anything that you learned from the project.
Yes, and I'm grateful to be here. Hello, everybody. It's been a while since I've seen the film itself, and honestly, like it felt very fresh. Like it really flowed from beginning to end very well. So I'm pretty proud of it. Um, I'm also pretty proud of like the evolution of the idea because when I initially came onto this project, I thought it was going to be just basically speaking head interviews. And I had no I had no idea that it was going to become something more cinematic. And I think the way it did unfold made the content be reflected in how like the material flowed very well. It made me feel too that the content of the video also flowed very well. And by that, I sort of, I guess, could say that um, I didn't really know that much about this situation and PFAS. And just watching this video from the perspective of like somebody outside of me, just as an observer, I felt that I was educated in this subject matter. And in a way where like, my attention was grabbed by the film and the content. So I think it's effective.
So if anyone has any questions, you could raise your hand or you could put your question in the chat and then we'll call on you or read out your question.
Don't see any questions in the chat right now, and I'm not sure if anyone has a hand up.
I don't see any hands, so I'll also say this working on this film was a really amazing team effort between a lot of different organizations, including Migrant Justice, Slingshot, Middlebury Professor Sam Byrne, and a lot of other people, Sylvia Knight, who is interviewed in the film. That's one of my favorite moments in the film when she says, the entrenched interests and powers that be aren't necessarily there for us. And there's an image of the Vermont legislature right then. there's an element of you know, I guess somewhat cynical humor in that, but yeah, it was just it was a really fun project, and it was a labor of love, and really grateful for the experience of working on it. And we're also still working on ways to share this film in the migrant worker community. Migrant Justice is obviously a very busy organization these days with everything that's going on with immigration issues and ICE and everything like that. So, you know, they're, you know, our target audience, and we're still looking for ways to share it. And we're also very open to seeing this shared around the country and other communities who find the messaging really relevant. So I see that there's a few messages in the chat. So Lance said, thank you for such a thorough, accessible film on this important subject. Christine from Brunswick, Maine asks, do we know if Vermont will also ban sludge spreading on farmland? I think that's one of the things we're still working on. That would be a dream. I think it's one of the things that we're raising awareness about through the film and in other ways, because I think so many people don't really know how badly we're treating our farmlands. Mary Beth Gardam says in the late 80s, she worked with migrant farmers in Georgia, and there was a pretty decent, though underfunded, Department of Migrant Health. Is this governmental department still in existence, and has it engaged with all the PFAS and pesticide issues? That is amazing that it has existed, and I hope it still does. That's something we should look into. So how have we marketed the film? We haven't done a lot of marketing. I did a showing in Heinsberg earlier in the spring as part of my effort to raise awareness on the artificial turf issue here, and put that in a context of all the different PFAS issues in the world. We also sent it to some film festivals. So far, I think we got denied by a couple of festivals, but we're waiting to hear from a couple. We got better about choosing festivals that we think would be receptive to the message of the film. So we're waiting to hear back. And then, is it possible to show this film even in Italy? Absolutely. It's available on YouTube, and we'll put the link in the chat. I can do that in just a minute. So yes, you know, this is meant to be shared, and anyone can share it in any context. We just want it to be used for educational purposes. And Lance just wrote, Wisconsin just set an upcoming requirement for spreading sludge that it must be tested for PFAS, and results would be submitted. Thank you, Ellen, for sharing the film link in the chat. That's really great news that precedent has been set in Wisconsin. Drew has raised his hand. Drew, could you unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question?
Yeah, thanks for hosting this. And I unfortunately missed the first 15 minutes or so, so I'll go back and watch the video. So hopefully I'm not repeating stuff that's already said, but I just wanted to share that, like, it's such a big problem. I imagine the focus of this film is around, like, pesticides that contain PFAS, land applying sludge that contains PFAS, but like it's in all of our products, it's in our clothing. So all this is going to our municipal wastewater treatment plants, like every time we run the washing machine, basically. But and my boss told me recently, I think she was citing a report from Minnesota, that, like, you know, a company can buy a pound of PFAS from anywhere from as cheap as $50 a pound, but then the cost to remove a pound of PFAS from municipal wastewater treatment can be up to $18 million a pound. So that just blew my mind when I heard it. It's so this ban really needs to be like they can't just I don't know. I don't think we'll ever get rid of this problem if we're just focused on, anyway, it's very much a broader social problem if it's in every single, almost every product in our house. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much, Drew. And we do have to wrap things up, but I'll read the last couple comments here. Laura says that Wisconsin sludge rules are inadequate when it comes to protecting farms' food and water. Testing is helpful, but does not protect us from PFAS contamination. We know Wisconsin sludge all contains PFAS. At the very least, a moratorium on sludge spreading should go into effect while the data comes in. And testing for PFAS means not only testing for a couple of the compounds, but also the 40 in method 1633, TOPA precursors and total organofluorine. So thank you for that. And then Laura shared a link for those of us who are interested in learning more about PFAS farms and sewage sludge, the Real Organic Project podcast released in June 2026. So thank you for sharing that. With that, Edwin, did you have any final words before we move on to the next segment?
Thank you for everybody being here.
Well,
Thank
I
you
get to
for
be
being here.
the first speaker of the evening, Dr. Kyla Bennett. And Dr. Bennett is the Director of Science Policy with Public Employees Environmental Responsibility, also known as PEER. Dr. Bennett was an EPA employee who became a whistleblower. And with degrees in law and ecology and extensive experience in government, Bennett is a unique resource for communities fighting PFAS contamination. So Dr. Bennett, take it away.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. I appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen here. And hopefully everybody will be able to see me. I have to wait for this to go up before I can do the slide. Okay, here we go, slideshow. There we go. Okay. Today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about PFAS in agriculture. And I thought that movie was great, and I'm going to be a little bit repetitive. I'll try to go through it quickly since that documentary did address some of the slides that I was about to show you. First, so we're all on the same page, what are PFAS? PFAS are a super large family of chemicals. There are more than 10,000, could be millions, depending on how you define them. But PFAS is an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. All of them have that carbon-fluorine bond, which is why they're called forever chemicals, because that carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest bonds that we know in organic chemistry. They are all synthetic, all man-made. I usually say human-made, but in this case, they were definitely made by men. They bioaccumulate in your body, they biomagnify through the food chain, and they are toxic. All of the ones that we've tested are toxic. And why are PFAS so useful? They're highly durable, they don't break down. They repel water, grease, and heat, and they make things slippery, which is why we find them in things like nonstick pans and grease-proof food packaging and cleaning supplies and shampoos and conditioners and water-resistant clothing and firefighting foam, carpets and upholstery, contact lenses, menstrual products, dental floss, artificial turf, guitar strings. The list goes on and on and on. How ubiquitous are PFAS? They're everywhere. They're in 97 to 99% of Americans' blood. They're in our water. They've been found in the Arctic. They're in our rain. They're in our soil. They have contaminated our food supply. And if you look at this graph on the right here, it shows blood levels of the most common PFAS. And the two legacy PFAS that we know the most about are two that have 8 carbons in their backbone of carbon-fluorine atoms. And those are PFOA and PFOS. They are incredibly dangerous. And in April of 2024, EPA said that there is no safe level of these two PFAS to ingest, 0, which is pretty stunning and concerning. So you can see that the levels from this graph of PFOA and PFOS have gone down, particularly PFOS. But what we're not testing for are those other PFAS. Remember, there's a huge family of these. And once PFOS and PFOA, people realized they were bad, stopped making them as much, although they're still manufactured in this country, at least PFOA is. They started substituting with other PFAS, and we don't know how bad those other PFAS are or how much of those other PFAS are in our blood. Sources of PFAS in agriculture. So Dr. Orlando, who's going to be speaking later, will talk about how PFAS gets into biosolids. But when you flush the toilet or take a shower or wash your dishes, all the PFAS from the shampoo and conditioner, from your cleaning products, from your water repelling clothing, whatever, goes down the drain, goes into the sewer. Wastewater treatment systems do not address PFAS. They do not take them out. In fact, there tends to be more PFAS coming out of a wastewater treatment plant than comes in. And all of that goes into biosolids. The water is taken out. The solids are spread on farm fields. They are also in pesticides. They are also in a lot of plastic containers that agriculture uses. They are everywhere. And one thing you need to be aware of is that the three routes of exposure of PFAS are ingestion, inhalation, and dermal absorption. You can actually absorb it through your skin and get it into your body. PFAS and pesticides. In 2024, I co-authored an article with a bunch of wonderful scientists from Center for Biological Diversity and EWG, Environmental Working Group. And we wrote about how PFAS are in pesticides for 4 primary reasons. They're often put in as an active ingredient. And you've probably read the press lately where the Trump administration is approving more of these pesticides that have PFAS as an active ingredient in the insecticide or the herbicide. They can be in there as inert ingredients. And if you look at the label of any pesticide, you'll see that it says inert ingredients, but it doesn't list them because they aren't required by law to list them. And sometimes PFAS can be in those inert ingredients and you won't even know it. They can be an adjuvant. This is something that's added afterwards before application to help pesticides, for example, spread more evenly across crops or leaves or disperse better to kill insects. And they can also be in fluorinated containers. And this is something that I discovered back in 2020 when I found PFAS in a mosquito insecticide called Anvil 1010. And EPA realized that it was coming from these fluorinated containers. These plastic containers are blasted with fluorine gas in order to make them less permeable so things don't leak out. And unfortunately, that process of fluorinating those plastic containers creates PFAS, including PFOA, one of those PFAS of which there is no safe level. So what we found in this paper that we wrote, and the citation is there, over the last 10 years, 30% of approved pesticides by EPA, the active ingredients were PFAS, 30%. PFAS in food. Contrary to what EPA just said, there is PFAS in food everywhere we look. There was an article in 2025 that showed increased consumption of shellfish is associated with significantly higher concentrations of 2 types of PFAS, PFNA and PFDA in your blood serum. Consumptions of potatoes, soda, beef, bagels, English muffins, and cold cereals are significantly associated with higher PFHXS. That's another PFAS in your blood. And also fluorinated plastic containers that hold food like extracts, flavorings will leach PFAS into the content. So PFAS has contaminated our food supply. It's also, as I'm sure Dr. Orlando will tell you, getting taken up from the biosolids into plants and into our dairy cows and into eggs of chickens. And so it's just absolutely everywhere. There's also PFAS in agricultural plastic. PFAS is in those greenhouse films. There are claims that have been made that biodegradable mulch film are PFAS free, but I have yet to see any test results that prove that. PFAS regulation, how is that going? Vermont regulates 5 PFAS in drinking water. EPA was supposed to be regulating 6 PFAS under the Safe Drinking Water Act, but the administration is rolling back the regulations on 4 of them. And the other two, they're delaying the implementation of that final rule until 2031. Keep in mind that PFAS are regulated in the parts per trillion because tiny, tiny amounts can be toxic. And again, I'm going to say this over and over again, PFOS, PFOA, no safe level, none. So one thing that people ask is, how can this be true? If it's legal, if we can go buy things on the shelf of your grocery store or Lowe's or Home Depot or Walmart or Target, it's got to be safe, right? No. Just because it's legal does not mean it's safe. And this is one of Dr. DeWitt's and my favorite sayings, is that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Just because we don't know yet doesn't mean it's safe. And unfortunately, we are not doing enough work to figure out how bad this contamination crisis is. So what's the solution? We have to define PFAS broadly. Right now, only one section of EPA, the Office of Pollution Prevention, has and Toxics, defines PFAS. The Office of Water doesn't have a standard definition. No other division has a standard definition. It needs to be defined broadly. We need to have EPA regulate PFAS as a large family of chemicals, not this whack-a-mole, one-by-one individual chemical basis. We need to ban all non-essential uses at the federal level, and we need to work on alternatives for those that are essential. The best time to regulate PFAS was 75 years ago, and the next best time is today. And unfortunately, under this administration, it is not going to happen. Thank you very much for your time, and I will stop sharing and take any questions that you might have.
Carla, I'm going to start with the first question, because I know that you were instrumental in helping Heinsberg, Vermont with the issue of AstroTurf. Today in the news, it was reported that South Burlington now is going to install AstroTurf. We actually have somewhat lost the battle at this point in Heinsberg, but we haven't given up. The board voted to install the AstroTurf, well, to do the agreement with the group about the AstroTurf. Can you talk about PFAS and AstroTurf? And just briefly, a little bit about is there.
Sure. I was one of the two scientists in 2019 who discovered PFAS and artificial turf. We were on a late night conference call. It was international. There were people there from all over the world. So it was like 10 o'clock at night. And I was very, very sleepy. But I heard one scientist say, "Oh, we're finding a lot of fluorine in artificial turf." And the next day I called Jeff Gearhart from the Ecology Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I said, "Do you think maybe artificial turf has PFAS?" And he said, "I don't know, let's test it." And we did. We found it. And of course, typical playbook of industry, they said, no, there's no PFAS in there. And then they said, okay, maybe there is PFAS, but it's not the bad kind, or it's not bioavailable. Now they're saying it's PFAS free. I have yet to see a correctly done lab report that shows turf that does not have PFAS. I have been sued in my individual capacity for saying this statement. The case was dismissed against me. We're countersuing with an anti-SLAPP suit, but I have to be very careful with what I say. But I still believe that at this point in time, all turf has PFAS. And until somebody shows me a properly done lab report that shows that they have the right detection limits, the right tests, that shows no PFAS, then it's a problem. But that being said, there may come a day when industry is able to get PFAS out of turf. That doesn't mean artificial turf is good. There's so many other problems with it, the microplastics, the nanoplastics, the heat. It's a fossil fuel product. I could go on and on. But still, I believe that as of today, all turf has PFAS.
Thank you, Carla. We do have a question from Lance Green, and this is the one that we will take before we move on, so we can ensure we get everyone in and have some time for questions at the end. Lance asks, fish are a very important source of PFAS, especially in some community populations. What do you know about any restrictions or bans on eating such fish, where they're happening?
That's a great question. And several states, Michigan, Wisconsin, even Massachusetts, is starting to do not eat advisories. They're not regulations, but they're saying in certain areas, particularly where there were Department of Defense facilities or firefighting training facilities that has really bad PFAS contamination, that people should not eat the fish there. And the FDA did actually several years ago turn away shipments of canned clams that had very high PFAS contamination, but there are no, in this country, in the EU, there are some rules about how much PFAS can be in food. In this country, there are no rules. We have reference doses, which you say this is how dangerous it is if you eat more than this amount, but there are no laws that prohibit the sale of these fish or eating these fish or whatever. So it's a really unfortunate situation, particularly for those communities that do sustenance fishing.
Exactly. Thanks so much. I think, Morgan, we'll move on.
Wonderful. It's my pleasure to introduce to you all Dr. Jamie DeWitt. And Dr. Jamie DeWitt is the Director of Environmental Health Sciences Center at Oregon State University with a PhD in environmental science and neuroscience. Dr. DeWitt has more than 20 years of experience leading innovative research in environmental toxicology and human health. We look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you so much, Morgan, for that introduction. And thanks to the wonderful film, and thanks to Kyla's slides, I will just be reinforcing many of the things that have already been said. But that's good, right? You, as Kyla said to me the other day, hear it once, remember it twice. Before I get into the science, I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the things that I do in my capacity as a faculty member at Oregon State and in my capacity as somebody who's been studying PFAS for more than 2 decades now. I do have funding to study the effects of PFAS, and I focus specifically on how they affect the immune system. And in my laboratory, we try to understand why they decrease the body's ability to have an effective response against vaccines. I also was a member of the EPA's PFAS Science Advisory Board. This was the group of scientists that the US EPA used to assess whether the quality of science they used in proposing the maximum contaminant levels and maximum contaminant level goals for the 6 PFAS that are currently regulated was appropriate. I speak about PFAS a lot, and I also serve as an expert witness in PFAS cases, mostly on the plaintiff's side. I think that we saw from the film and from Kyla's presentation that PFAS are in many different products and processes. This is, I wanted to highlight because I actually found this on WebMD. This is a resource that some of us might use if we're trying to figure out, why my elbow hurts or, why this one thing made my stomach upset. This is, to me, really important that the medical community is now acknowledging that PFAS are a concern for patients. This has been kind of slow to grow, so I wanted to share this to demonstrate that some healthcare information sites are putting up information that is accurate about PFAS. So what is presented here is what we know PFAS have been in and are still in. But we'll be talking a little bit, I'll be talking specifically about what PFAS do to our bodies and expanding a little bit on what was already shared in the film. This is a figure that is just amazing. It's from the Minnesota Department of Health. And I really like this because it highlights how PFAS get into the environment. So what are the major sources or inputs of PFAS into the environment? What are the different pathways where we can find PFAS to get exposed? So we know, and Kyle already mentioned this, and the film mentioned this, PFAS can be found in air, in surface, groundwater, in our drinking water, in the soil where they can get taken into plants, in wildlife, in the food that we consume, and PFAS are found in us, including in breast milk, in infants, in umbilical cord blood. So we know that if we take PFAS into our bodies and then become pregnant, those PFAS can be transferred to the babies as they're developing and to the babies as they're consuming breast milk, which is still really important for the development of babies. But what I want to point out is that, PFAS can be found in all these different areas where they're produced, where products that contain PFAS are manufactured, where we use products, and then when those products containing PFAS are disposed of. I think Drew made a comment about how we have so many PFAS in our products that every time we do the laundry and that water goes to a wastewater facility, that adds PFAS into the environment. And that is true. We all unfortunately contribute a little bit of PFAS to the environment. We're all exposed to PFAS in our homes because of the products that we bring in. But still, the biggest contributors of PFAS to the environment are those organizations and companies that produce and use PFAS. So we wouldn't have it in our products or in our homes if it wasn't being produced. And the footprints of PFAS contamination tend to be the largest at those manufacturing facilities that are emitting PFAS into the environment. So Kyla, again, already went over this, but I wanted to show you a little bit about where PFAS might be used across the spectrum of different products. So we know PFAS are very important in industrial products. The carbon-fluorine bond in PFAS is among the strongest bonds in chemistry. That makes PFAS very stable. It makes them useful in many different environments. And as a result, it makes them very useful in a wide variety of products. PFAS can be the main ingredient in industrial and consumer products. It can also be an active ingredient. And Kyla, I'm citing your paper here because it's a wonderful paper. It can be an active ingredient in pesticides, for example. PFAS can be a secondary product in products. So it might be used as not the main ingredient, but a supplementary ingredient. So it might be applied, for example, to climbing ropes to make them slick, but the rope is still the main ingredient. In consumer products, PFAS might be intentionally added, such as nonstick coatings for cookware or on our dental floss so that it slides between our teeth very easily. But PFAS and pesticides might also be an inert ingredient. It might be added as a surfactant or to help the PFAS spread or stick better. And then in industrial products, PFAS can be processing aids used to make, for example, other PFAS or other types of products. But I wanted to point out that across all of these different categories, PFAS also can be unintended contaminants and unintended byproducts of various processes being used to make or store or house the various products. So even if PFAS aren't added intentionally, they can still end up in products because of a reaction or because of an unintended consequence of another item added to the product. So there's a lot of different PFAS. They can be in all these different products, and they can be in the different products for various reasons. But at the end of the day, a PFAS is still a PFAS. And there might be different ways that we can define PFAS for management purposes, but for purposes of chemistry, there is really only one definition of a PFAS, and it is the definition given by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They define a PFAS by their chemical structures. And that is the definition that is the most scientifically agreed upon across the scientific community. But a PFAS is a PFAS. We might call something in a pharmaceutical not a PFAS, even though it's a PFAS and may degrade to a PFAS. So all of these different products might have different PFAS in them, but they're still all PFAS. The issue with health and risks to our health arise when there are the interactions of maybe different PFAS with each other in these products and the interactions of those PFAS with other chemicals in these products. Those interactions create mixtures, and those mixtures can change maybe how those PFAS interact with biological molecules in our body to produce toxicity. Mixtures, toxicity for PFAS and other chemicals is still one of the really understudied areas of toxicology, especially for PFAS. So even though the PFAS might be the same in all of these different products, so we might have PFOA in an industrial product, in a consumer product, and in a pesticide, that PFOA might influence our bodies differently given the other chemicals in the product in which it is contained. So in the film, you saw all of the different health risks, and I wanted to highlight that we in the scientific community call PFAS multi-system toxicants. These are chemicals that are able to affect multiple parts of our bodies to increase the risk of different diseases. And as you'll see, these diseases are sometimes kind of different from one another. So thyroid disease is different from testicular cancer. There might be cancer arising in the thyroid from PFAS exposure, but it might arise from a different molecular interaction of PFAS with the thyroid cells than a PFAS that produces cancer in the testes. So all of these different health effects that are identified in the figure on the left of your screen are health effects that have been identified from epidemiological studies or studies of people who are exposed to PFAS occupationally or because they live in an area with high levels of PFAS in the environment. Some of these studies, though, are just from the general population where people have had their PFAS level measured through biomonitoring studies, and these associations were found. So we've got things from endocrine disruption. This is where your hormones are disturbed. And one of the health outcomes that has been observed most frequently is thyroid disease. Thyroid's very important for development. It's also important for metabolism and your energy levels in your body. We've seen in various populations elevated cholesterol. These are in adults as well as in children. With elevated cholesterol, there's an increased risk of cardiovascular diseases. We've seen liver damage in terms of changes in liver enzymes measured in blood. You might have this measured if you have a metabolic panel done at your healthcare provider's office. We also see kidney and testicular cancer. The evidence for kidney cancer is a bit stronger than the evidence for testicular cancer, but these are the two main types of cancer with the strongest links. Although emerging data suggests that bladder cancer, prostate cancer, and breast cancer also are types of cancers that are being linked to PFAS exposures. And then developing organisms also can be affected. And one of the strongest links is a decreased birth weight in babies born with elevated levels of PFAS. But there's also been reports of pregnancy-induced hypertension and preeclampsia, increased risk of miscarriage, increased risk of a longer time to get pregnant, increased risk of a reduced time for breastfeeding. A report just came out that highlighted some of these findings, a scientific report. If women who have higher levels or people who have higher levels of PFAS in their blood don't breastfeed for as long. We don't really know why that's happening. There's some signal that says stop breastfeeding earlier than what the baby needs. I want to also point out that many of these health risks uncovered through epidemiological studies also have been supported by data from experimental animal studies where individual PFAS have been given to experimental animals, and we see the same types of health effects. So this makes us have greater confidence that what we're observing in people is an actual effect and not just an artifact of the study. So just real quickly before I end for you all and give Laura a chance to speak, the National Academies did put out a report in 2022 intended to help healthcare providers understand the potential risks of PFAS exposure to people in their communities who might have increased levels of PFAS in their drinking water or in their foods or in the community because of their occupation. And what this report does is provide healthcare providers with elevated standards of care that can be given to patients who may have elevated levels of certain PFAS in their blood. So if healthcare providers don't know about this, this is a great tool to take to them if you're concerned about PFAS in your community and how it might be affecting your health. Finally, I thank you for listening and will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeWitt. I really appreciated all of everything you just shared. I did have one follow-up question in the chat, and we'll get to the others at the end, but somebody asked if you could share something about the presence of PFAS in pharmaceuticals and what we know about that.
Yeah, and one thing, I study the immune system and the vaccine antibody response and forgot to highlight that on my slide. I realized, oh shoot, I forgot to mention that decreased responses to vaccines is one of the health effects that's been associated with PFAS exposure. So to the best of my knowledge, the addition of PFAS to pharmaceutical agents is one of the fastest growing areas of pharmaceutical drug development. And I understand that PFAS are added to pharmaceuticals for a multitude of reasons. They could be added to the manufacturing process to enhance certain characteristics during the manufacturing process. They're used in medical devices as well. But in pharmaceuticals, they may enhance the ability of the compound to get to the target site. They may enhance the longevity of the pharmaceutical agent in the body. I think there's about 4 or 5 different reasons that PFAS are added to pharmaceuticals, but it is a rapidly growing area of pharmaceutical drug development. Prozac, for example, has a PFAS group in it. I think Lipitor might also have a PFAS group associated with it. There's also several antibiotics that have PFAS groups in them, as well as some sedative hypnotic agents.
Thank you for all of that information. Very helpful. And again, we'll be getting to some of the other questions in the chat after our next speaker. So I'll turn it back to you, Margeurite.
Our third and final speaker is Dr. Laura Orlando. Dr. Orlando is the senior scientist at Just Zero, and her work includes research on toxic chemicals in landfills, drinking water, biosolids, and fertilizer sludge, and sewage systems and their exposure pathways. And this is all done with the goal of pollution prevention. So welcome, Dr. Orlando. Take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm glad to be here. So great to hear from Jamie and Kyla, and I see one of my mentors on this in this group. Thank you for being here. I might not be here without you. And a little bit about language. I use the term sewage sludge. I don't use the term biosolids. They are interchangeable to me when it comes to PFAS and other contaminants. They're the same thing. And so I don't use that public relations term or that regulatory term biosolids. So you won't hear it in my presentation. And I'm going to talk about sludge. This is how you could reach me. I work with a group called Just Zero, a national organization focused on waste-related issues. And we do a lot of PFAS and sewage sludge-related work. And I have been working to end the land application of sewage sludge since 1993, way before PFAS came onto the radar screen. Why? Because sewage sludge is always loaded with poisons that we don't want in our water, our food, or in us. So let's talk a little bit about what is sewage sludge. It's the semi-solid residual generated during wastewater treatment. So you have a sewer. What goes down the sewer? Not only feces and urine from households, but also industries that are hooked to the sewer, factories, metal plating companies, auto shops, you name it. Look through the yellow pages. If nobody looks through the yellow pages, but you know what I mean. You can see what's in your town. It's all hooked to the sewer. And the wastewater treatment plant is not designed to remove PFAS, microplastics, or other pollutants. It's really focused on removing the nutrients that can change aquatic ecosystems. And what's not removed is often concentrated in the sewage sludge. The sludge is not human waste. It's not feces. It has some of the residuals, which we're going to talk a little bit about that, of human waste, but it is the sloughed off, primarily bacteria from the treatment process, that bacteria that consumes the organics in the sewage. And those sloughed off bodies create a solid, and the solid attracts the chemicals that are attracted to solids. Those that are attracted to water stay in the water column, like caffeine and ibuprofen. And those that aren't, like plastics, will move towards the sewage sludge. And then that sludge, it's always generated in the wastewater treatment process. And that sludge, about 50% of it, according to the EPA, is land applied. What does that mean? The land application of sewage sludge is regulated under the Clean Water Act. The regulations came out in 1993. They're called the Part 503s. And what does it regulate? Heavy metals in pathogens, not PFAS. You didn't hear PFAS. It doesn't regulate any other chemical, even though groups like PEER and others, through litigation and every means you can imagine, have tried to get the EPA to regulate all of the many thousands of poisons in sewage sludge. EPA has refused. So here we are stuck with completely inadequate regulations. It is legal to put sewage sludge as long as it meets the 503s regarding heavy metals and pathogens on gardens, farms. You can bag it, you can sell it, you can give it away. In the only two states that prevent that are Maine and Connecticut. In Maine, shout out to Maine. Maine has been a beacon on this. And I'm happy to talk about that in the questions and answers. But in Marina Schaufler in the book Inescapable, which I put a link to a review of that I actually wrote, it does a great job of talking about how Maine responded to this catastrophe. So what happens when sludge is land applied? It gets into the air. And this is really important when we talk about our farm workers and farmers. It gets into the soil, the poisons, PFAS, plastics, pharmaceuticals, pathogens. Remember, the 503s don't eliminate pathogens. They just can reduce the pathogens. And some of those contaminants persist for decades or hundreds of years or maybe forever with regard to PFAS. Contaminates water, surface water, groundwater, sewage sludge. The contaminants in sludge contaminate food, plants, livestock, wildlife, fish, and then, of course, human exposure. Lots of data about this. And it contaminates us, right? Not only farm workers, eaters, drinkers, and it's all a travesty. Now, the one thing about the land application of sewage sludge, it's not inevitable. This is a disposal practice. We can stop it. Maine has stopped it. It's not, we have to put sludge on land. There's nothing else to do with it. That is not the story here. We can prevent this contamination tomorrow in Vermont and elsewhere by preventing land application. What are the occupational risks to farm workers? We don't talk a lot. I don't talk a lot about this. I've been talking a lot about PFAS lately, and for good reason. Profoundly harmful. Dr. Bennett said, there is no safe level. And when it comes to land application, states are passing rules in guidance. EPA just came out with some new guidance that says, we can do thousands of times more PFAS of even just a few PFAS compounds. We're not going to look at all of them. And we can add thousands of times more to soil. And this is all feasibility studies. They're not health-based studies. It's like we can reach these numbers, so we're going to say these numbers are okay. People aren't talking about the viruses, bacteria, other pathogens in sewage sludge. They're there. The endotoxins, which are a relevant health risk for people working on these farms, heavy metals, and other contaminants. They're in the sludge apart from the PFAS, and there's good data to show that these pathogens and other contaminants apart from PFAS cause risk to workers and farmers. Do sludge regulations protect farm workers? No. The 503 rule passed in 93 requires waiting periods for grazing livestock, for harvesting certain crops, for allowing public access to treated fields. By the way, this is only for what's called Class B sewage sludge. The rules regulate two different classes of sludge, A and B. A means it's heated, you add lime to it, you do something to reduce the pathogens, and you meet certain metal requirements. Has nothing to do with PFAS, has nothing to do with endotoxins. It doesn't eliminate pathogens, it just reduces them to get to class A. And with the class B requirements, there are some waiting periods. Are there waiting periods for farm workers? No. Nothing in the federal rules protects farm workers or farmers or farm families. What's happening in Vermont? What do we know about PFAS and sludge? Vermont DEC has tested PFAS and sludge. Testing's good. Testing does not protect public health. The state has to act on the testing data. Class A sludge, you can dump anywhere and not, according to federal regulations, you can put it anywhere and you don't have to keep a record of it. So we don't know where this Class A sludge, if you add wood chips, if you heat it up, you add lime to it, it becomes this Class A or so-called exceptional quality. We don't know where it goes. And Vermont doesn't know where it's gone. Does it have PFAS in it? Absolutely. The difference between Class A and Class B, sometimes the Class A just concentrates the PFAS. It doesn't get rid of it by any means. There's no publicly searchable database with the data Vermont DEC has. So one of the things to ask for if you're in Vermont is, come on, make this stuff available to us. Make it transparent. Vermont has not banned land application. They should, they must. This kind of risk management approach based on feasibility and not health-based numbers is bankrupt when it comes to protecting public health. And programs like in Vermont, in Maryland, in Virginia, in Michigan, and elsewhere that have this tiered system or that say, oh, we're looking at a couple PFAS compounds are not looking at the building blocks, the precursors. They're not looking at the total organofluorine content, which shows really the PFAS burden. It affects our health all the same way. And we need the full picture. We need the kind of testing that gives us the full picture because our bodies respond to the full picture, right? And they respond to the total PFAS load in our food, in our water, in our exposures on farms. And that's it for me. I want to make sure there's time for question and answers, but you've got my email in the beginning there. You can find Just Zero in social media, and I'm happy to answer questions now and later.
I'll kick off with a question right away. Laura, is there a state that is doing things right? I mean, could you tell us? You've given us a good outline of what we need to do in Vermont. Is there anyone who's
Maine,
Maine?
Maine, Bill Pluker, hero extraordinaire, Maine organic farmer, and Bill didn't act alone. Many farmers stepped forward, especially not all organic. Fred Stone was one of the first ones and said, hey, we have a problem and I'm not going to poison my eaters. I'm not going to poison my drinkers. Maine said, okay, let's look at this problem. They didn't just put together a task force. They put together a task force that said, geez, this is a massive problem. Let's provide money. It's now close to 100 million or more. Research in what to do with PFAS impacted fields, money for impacted families, not only farm families, but their neighbors, mental health support, medical support, blood serum testing. Maine is really in Marina, in that book I mentioned, really kind of lays it out in a readable book, but Maine's been a beacon on this, and they are trying to hold back the pressure from industry that doesn't want them to be a beacon. And the way we can support Maine is by getting our states. I'm in Massachusetts. We're working hard here. We need Vermont, we need New Hampshire, we need New York, we need states across the country to pass bans on the land application of sludge, and that's the best thing we can do to support Maine.
I can tell you, Laura, we proposed those twice and we have not been able to get them out of committee. It's so frustrating here in Vermont.
Well, you know what we hear from industry and from our legislators and they hear this from the lobbyists for industry, is that it's too expensive. It's too expensive. We can't do the right thing. So we're going to just spread this all over on our farms. But they're not talking about the economic ecosystem, which provides taxpayer dollars to the many millions of dollars to a small group of industry players that haul and dump the sewage sludge from our publicly financed wastewater treatment plants. That money is not being included into the it's too expensive piece. And when we include that, it doesn't become too expensive.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Morgan for the general questions. So I guess we can evolve the speakers up and you guys can decide which one will take the questions.
Yeah, Ellen, would you highlight all three speakers? And I think my first question might be for Dr. Orlando, which is, could you share something more about the PFAS and air testing? One of the questions in the chat was someone whose workplace may be affecting them with PFAS that's airborne, and anyone could answer that.
I'm not really the best person to ask. Dr. DeWitt or Bennett, can you respond to this?
So PFAS have been found in the air. They've been found in what's known as dry deposition and wet deposition. They've been found in rainfall. We know that PFAS can be inhaled, but the number of studies recently done on the health effects from inhalation exposure is relatively low. However, historically, if we look back at some of the very early tests done by some of the companies that were developing PFAS, inhalation exposure and toxicity arising from inhalation exposure was one of the primary drivers of concern for occupational exposures for these compounds. But we just don't have recent data.
So how would someone test the air in their workplace?
You can't. There are machines that you can put up that will test. We did this. Well, I was involved in a landfill in New York, right next to a school, and there was PFAS coming out of this landfill, obviously. And they wanted to know how the school was like 200 feet away. And they put up these passive receivers. I don't know how much it costs. I don't know which labs do it. I could probably find out, but I don't know off the top of my head. But I do know it's possible.
Yeah, there are different filters that can be used. So generally you need to have something that sucks in the air. If you want to measure what's in the air, there's different filters. So you can analyze the different PFAS on the different filters. So there can also be passive sampling devices that can collect PFAS in the air. And there are even some scenarios where workers could wear silicone wristbands or tags, and PFAS that deposit onto those can be measured. But those, to my knowledge, right now are only good at capturing volatile PFAS, the ones that can get out into the air. And then so you can see what's in there if you wanted to know what my personal exposure was.
I have a question, and I guess it's one I've been wondering about too, because I seem to see every day on my feed a new method for disposing of PFAS. So my question is, are there truly any 100% effective methods of disposing of PFAS? And I don't care who takes it.
No.
No.
A lot of those methods can be accomplished at what we call the bench, in the lab in small amounts. But the sheer quantity of PFAS contaminated water and soil and, all of this stuff, it's impossible. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, and I hear this all the time, well, now that we can destroy PFAS, which we can't, now that we can destroy it, it's okay to put more into the environment. No, because once it's in an aquifer, I know on Cape Cod here in Massachusetts, they were talking at one point about the aquifer, the sole source aquifer is contaminated by Otis Air Force Base, not with PFAS, this was perchlorate. They were talking about pumping it all out, treating it and putting the water back in, and they decided it was going to cost like $1 trillion or something. So once it's out in the environment, in our soil, in our air, in our water, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. Or when I worked at EPA in wetlands, we used to say you can't turn a hamburger back into a cow. So it's done, it's over. Once it's out there, you're out of luck. So if we can destroy it, great, but that's only for certain things, and much of the contamination is in places where we can't gather it to destroy it.
Thank you. I see that Don has his hand up. Don, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you all for having this forum here. So very interesting, the advances that have been made in scientific studies. I know there's still a long ways to go, but I want to give a shout out to Kyla, who's been on my radio show before, Friendly Fire, a voice for veterans. We originally started in Maine, and of course, Maine was one of the first states to really start with the farmer in Arundel that Laura mentioned, to really start to get on the PFAS issue. Also want to give a shout out to Pat Elder from Maryland, who has been instrumental in exposing PFAS contamination, and also Martha Spice from Maine, who's been up at Brunswick Air Force Base. And the main reason I wanted to say something was that, and I didn't get in at the beginning of the show, and I don't know if this issue has been addressed or not, but very quickly, how veterans have been exposed to PFAS contamination. And the military bases are just loaded with this stuff. The base that I was stationed at, Pease Air Force Base, which is no longer an Air Force base in Newington, New Hampshire, is the only place that the government has actually done a study, and I was a participant in that study, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, ATSDR, working in conjunction with the CDC's National Center for Environmental Health, actually tested individuals who were on the base. And fortunately, I was only there for a few years, so I have elevated cholesterol. But of course, you can't prove that that's related to PFAS contamination. And considering what everybody else has gone through with the cancers and everything, it's just it really pretty insignificant. But thank you again for everything that you're doing, and realize that the military bases are a major source of contamination because of the aqueous firefighting foam that's been used. The base in Hawaii, Joint Air Force Base Hickam, Pearl Harbor, has a huge problem with this right now. The Navy is doing nothing about this. And so veterans, active duty military are just guinea pigs for this. The military is not addressing this at all. Thank you so much. And if you get a chance, tune into Friendly Fire, Voice for Veterans, on WMPG.org. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And what's interesting about what you said is that I had just read that the DOJ is delaying the cleanup of PFAS at bases, and even the work around investigating how much PFAS and toxins that are a lot of military bases, and not only the bases, but the communities that surround those bases.
Right. Yeah, they've been significantly impacted also. Right. It's not just the people on the base, but yeah, offsite also. Right. Good point.
Yeah. So question here. Now I think here. It's a question I think more for Laura. Aren't some farms in West Texas trying to get away from sludge application?
I think Kyla responded to that.
I think that's our case, Pierre. We're working with farmers and the county, Johnson County in Texas. They had 2 farms where they were organic farms, and the farm across the street spread biosolids, and it killed all their fish, killed all their cows, killed their peacocks, their dogs. They're all having health problems. Their soil, their water, everything is contaminated. The farms are now shut down. And we are suing EPA, and they are our plaintiffs. Simultaneously, those farmers also have a private attorney, and they're suing Synagro, which is the company that spread the biosolids, for damages. And that's turned into a class action lawsuit. We tried to get some legislation passed in Texas, similar to Maine. And as Laura said, Maine is the beacon of light in this country as far as PFAS and biosolids or sewage sludge. Texas, the bill never got out of committee. Politics in Texas is tough. Oklahoma also had a bill saying no spreading of biosolids, didn't make it out of committee. A lot of states are trying, people like us are pushing it, suing, but it's, as Laura said, she's been working on this for decades, and it's really, really tough going because EPA has been captured by industry. That is the bottom line.
So I just want to jump in and say that there was a question if anyone has information about the silicone wristbands. I did put an article about that in the chat, so Tegan, you can take a look at that. I wanted to follow up on the question Bob asked earlier. Has anyone tried contacting corporate executives directly about talking to them about the effects on their own grandchildren? And I think Dr. Orlando, you mentioned a story about Arlene Bloom at the Green Policy Institute. I wondered if you could tell that story. It sounds like it might be hopeful, so I'd like to hear something hopeful.
I mean, I think we've all looked at, there's many stories about lead poisoning and knowing about lead poisoning and the refusal to take lead out of gasoline, and take a refusal to take lead out of drinking water pipes. And of course, the pesticide stories, the glyphosate story, and of course, gas and oil, right? Industry leaders know what is happening to their children and their grandchildren in the future of the world, um uh and they're moving forward with looking at their, their profit motive, and, as my brother would say, paying their Lexus off. So I think that, I know in the sludge world, it is just those industry leaders like Bob Preston, who's the CEO of Synagro, a company that Kyla mentioned, which is one of the biggest land application sludge haulers and processors and land appliers in the country. It's owned by Goldman Sachs, a division of Goldman Sachs, private equity. In Preston leads one of the most active lobbying organizations, lobbying for no rules on the land application of sludge. And so, that said, Arlene Bloom told a story. She's at the Green Policy Institute. She's an incredible person in this world of identifying chemical poisons and trying to understand what to do differently, both policy and in the, with the chemistry. And she told a story about bringing together executives from the carpet industry and really bringing them together to talk about PFAS in carpets. And primarily people from Georgia, as she told this story. And that none of them wanted to act alone, but as a group, they were willing to act. And so she told a very upbeat story at the PFAS conference in Ann Arbor 2 years ago about the result of that meeting was that they voluntarily decided to restrict, this group of executives, to restrict the use of PFAS in their products. And she's not a bullshitter. I think when Arlene says there's a story like that, it's a real story. And I wish I had more details, but you could probably go to the Green Policy Institute and maybe find some information on it. And so I don't think it's a hopeless path. I think we have to keep trying to talk to the leaders and the people who provide leadership or the lack of leadership in our industries, but also as users of these things. We can, as Michael Pollan talks about, voting with your fork. We should, vote with the purchases that we make, and just keep hammering our legislators to do something about this catastrophe of PFAS poisoning.
Thank you so much. I think that we're a little bit over time, so we're going to wrap things up at this point. I just wanted to thank everybody here for attending this scientific and educational presentation, as well as our distinguished panel of experts for sharing your knowledge and insights. going forward, we hope everyone here feels better prepared and more knowledgeable, advocating to protect our environment, advocating to protect workers on our farms and in our fields, and yourselves and your families. We have a few resources to suggest to you that we're going to put up on the screen. The PFAS No Mas link is in the chat. We'll also be encouraging you to check out our website, www.militarypoisons.org. And if you're interested in advocating for legislation in your state, we suggest checking out Safer States, which is at saferstates.org.
And if you're interested in learning where you can find PFAS-free products, we suggest that you check out PFAS Central, the PFAS Project Lab, the Environmental Working Group, and Mamavation. And if you want more information from us, either myself or Morgan, you'll also find our emails in the chat. We'll leave the chat up for a few minutes so that people can jot some things down. We also, I think if it's all right with the presenters, have copies of their slides if anyone's interested in getting those. And we will be sending a copy of the recording to everyone who registered. So we want to thank you. And I think our final message is we really need to get rid of PFAS and toxins in our environment. We are poisoning ourselves and our planet. And hence the title of the program, PFAS No Mas. We need to look for those alternatives that Kyla talked about. So I hope everyone has a lovely evening, and we can't thank you enough for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I see a great question in the chat, so if anyone does want to stick around and answer one more question, feel free. And for those who have to go, thank you again so much for joining us. It's been really wonderful to educate ourselves together and learn, and to be surrounded with advocates who are involved in making a difference. So this gives me hope.
Thank you.
We'll leave the screen up so you can copy stuff down if you want, or save the chat if you know how to do that.
Yeah, this last question was from Lance asking about using microbes and biologically available materials that might be able to dispose of or destroy PFAS in place. Do we have any information about that?
Yeah, there's a biomediation program that they're looking at in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. And it uses fungus and, other natural things to try and absorb or destroy PFAS. I'm not really familiar with it, but I can send Jane some information on that. Lance. I can get your email. I'll send that to you, Lance.
Yeah,
Oh,
Lance.
thank you very much.
Okay.
We are very skeptical, a lot of us environmentalists here in Wisconsin, that this is actually working. But a local company sold it to the Dane County Board, and they put $1.5 million into this and are touting its results. You can look at the link to the article that I sent, the first article on results, but I'm not sure that that even shows in a real way that the PFAS were destroyed.